You should be ready to go.
Okay, great. I'll wait until 1. The atomic clock says 1. Okay, it's 1 p.m. on Monday, February 9th, 2026. This is a meeting of the Land Use Review Board. I am Janet Hurley, the chair. I will ask others to introduce themselves, board members, that is. Sarah?
Sarah Hadd, good afternoon.
Alex?
Glenn Hagan, hello everyone.
Brooke?
Brooke Dingledine, good afternoon.
Brooke, I could barely hear you. Could others hear Brooke?
Barely.
I will have to fiddle with my input. Can you hear
Okay.
that better? I'm speaking loudly.
Yes,
Yes.
that's a little bit better. Still
Okay,
not great.
I'll work
Okay.
on that.
Okay, and Kirsten?
Kirsten Sultan, board member.
Okay. Agenda updates. I would like to note that I do not believe we have personnel matters to discuss for an executive session. So when we get there, we don't need that as part of the motion unless somebody else knows something different. And also that we have an additional enforcement case to add to that list. Is that what you're nodding about, Brooke? Okay. So you'll take care of that case number when we get there? Okay, thank you. Any other?
Yeah, just to note, Janet, on that same topic, that I'm interested in getting
Oh, that's right.
some feedback from our legal team, and so the the agenda doesn't mention attorney-client communications, but I'd like there to be some in executive session, so we can just
Okay, that's
reflect that.
great. So we'll add that as well. Thanks. Any other agenda changes or updates? Okay. Do we have any public present at this time who would like to speak? Oh, Brooke, your hand is up. Can we hear you?
I'm still working on that, Janet, but I do not have an invite for executive session.
Oh,
And I don't know if that's unique to my situation, but I just
I
wanted
have
to.
one, I think. Does everybody else on the board
I have
have
one.
one? I think we can just
I have
call
one.
you in.
I can forward it on to you, Brooke, too.
Okay,
Thank you, I appreciate it.
okay, thanks. Thanks, Pete. Okay, sorry that we were asking for public comments on non-agenda items. Do we have any of those? Okay, it appears no. So we have consent agenda to review and approve January 26th and February 2nd minutes. Kirsten,
I'll make a motion to approve both of those sets of minutes, subject to any revisions as discussed here.
thank you.
Also,
So thank you, Sarah. You beat Alex to it. Does anyone have any suggested or requested revisions to those two sets of minutes, board members? Looks like no. We are a go for a vote, I think. All those in favor of approving both sets of these minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is 5 ayes. That is unanimous. Those minutes are approved. Next, we have operations budget and legislative updates. I believe that Pete, you wanted to just let the board know that the annual report is nearing completion. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Janet, on that. I mean, I think there's some kind of broad pieces there that are framing up, but you know, it's a little bit farther behind than I would have liked this year. A little more pressures on getting that data together for everyone. But yeah, and then I think you all had decided that Brooke would take a maybe a little bit deeper dive, and I think she's done that. So we'll take those revisions and get the report cleaned up.
And that is due next Tuesday, right? Or
The
is it Monday?
17th. 17th. I think we've got a holiday in
okay.
there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, thank you for that update. Do you have other operational sorts of updates to provide us today, Pete?
Do you want me to go into legislative or bifurcate that?
Let's just, if you don't have operations, sure, just jump into legislative.
Okay, yeah, great. I'll just say the two things. One, Rural Caucus is going to be having a press conference this week, and the other is that the Senate Economic Development Committee and Senate Natural Resources are having a joint hearing on Tuesday. We have been invited, and I've informed them that we have the Lamoille Valley, the Lamoille application at that time, but we would like to be part of the conversation going forward.
Okay. I guess we can report that we spoke with the House Committee on Environment on Thursday to present our budget requests. And then Kirsten and I spoke with the House Agriculture, forgetting the
Food and
name.
Forestry.
Food and Forestry, yes. Also on Thursday, focusing on our recommendations regarding legislative changes to the treatment of logging yards and farming and not farming, forestry and logging. So we did that, and we are speaking with the Senate Committee on Natural Resources later this week, or at least the chair, on budgeting. And we will be, I don't think we're scheduled with anyone else right now.
No, we're not scheduled with anyone else right now. I still do anticipate we'll be in House Appropriations in the next week or two, probably.
Okay. Okay, so go ahead, Kirsten.
Pete, wasn't there also an inquiry about, was it Senate Ag? With respect to accessory on-farm businesses that I think is tentatively scheduled that maybe we'll discuss when we get to that item?
Yeah, that's correct. Let's see.
The 19th?
That
maybe?
is going to be the following week. Yeah. Yep. So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
19th. Yeah. Good reminder.
Yeah.
Okay, is that all for legislative right now? Okay. And I mean, that sort of goes along with budget right now too. I don't think we have anything different on budget. So
since
I
last
think
week.
we're done with that item E, and can move on to discussion of accessory on-farm business. So I think I would like to preface what discussion we do have with my thinking right now is that we are not ready to submit a report to the Ag committees next week. And I would like to put a pause on that and talk with Rep. Durfee and Senator Ingalls about or at least alert them to the fact that this report needs more thought, and we don't want to present something that, you know, isn't fully baked, and so would ask that they consider taking this report later.
I would agree
Any
with that,
thought?
Janet.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Sarah, sorry.
Sarah? Okay, thank you.
I would agree with that. We have a lot of items, that are percolating right now. We have to focus on Lamoille and Addison County and, recognize, the angst around tier 3 and road rule. And I would really love to give those the proper attention that they need, to try and alleviate some of that angst and focus our work on that. I think also if we could take extra time, it would be a better product. I think there are
Yeah.
questions that we have for legal that it would behoove us to have solid answers on, before we submit and then have to subsequently the following week present. I don't think that rushing this will do a good job of either. And so I'm absolutely in agreement. And whatever we need to do to ask for that, amendment, I'm happy to help on that front.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd like to, I think I would like to have something that is, as I said, more fully baked, but also that has adequate legal review before we present it to the legislature. So I think all we would need is for the board to agree to have me contact the two chairs and just let them know that we need more time to develop a fully baked report. Alex?
So Janet, what's your thought about the time horizon for a fully baked report? Is it the September 30th deadline that we indicated we would try to hit for the tier 2, the larger tier 2 report, or not?
I have to admit that I don't even think that September 30th is enough time, considering how many regional plans are going to be coming at us for the next several months. And yeah, I feel like you know, maybe January 1st at this point. I'm not sure, but I read the draft report and the time frame that was, you know, proposed in the draft. I just felt like I just don't feel like we are going to have the capacity to make that happen. So that's my
I
feeling.
understand. I understand.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. When I read the latest draft, I looked at the process and timeline, and I thought, boy, there are a lot of dates in there about engaging stakeholders and putting stuff out to the public in March and April and July 1st and then leading up to September 30th. And I didn't think that sounded good to me. But the reason I asked the question is that I'm still of the mind that we have ideas about the areas that need attention, and that the way to give those areas attention is to address them in our rulemaking, the general rulemaking that I hope that we're going to get started on later this year, and that I think will likely take us maybe a year to complete, maybe
Yeah.
9 months. I don't know, but I'm thinking that larger rulemaking effort will take us quite some time, given all the deferred maintenance of those rules that's happened over the last 10 years. So if I were going to sit in front of that committee and give them an update, regardless of whether we're delivering a report with it, I would want to tell them, here are the areas that we want to work on, and And I think our timeline to do so, puts us well into 2027, probably the fall of 2027. And so, if there's statutory changes that would come along, we'd probably be recommending them at that time, and then they could be taken up in the second half of the
Yeah.
next biennium in the
Yeah.
2028 legislative session.
Yeah, I agree. I, you know, I don't think that we're even ready to tell them exactly what the issues are that we intend to address. So that's why I feel like we really shouldn't put this, finalize this report in the next week, because I feel like the board needs to have more discussion. I feel like I have questions for legal that I want to have our legal team answer before we even finalize a preliminary kind of idea about where we're going with all this. So 1 week isn't going to do it. So Kirsten, thank you for being patient.
Well, yeah, so I agree with all the discussion, and I think, I will share, I mean, even just in the last few days since a draft version was provided to, just to keep the conversation advancing, Sarah and I have spent some time drilling down further into some of the areas, and I definitely think we need to have quite a bit more board conversation around this. And also the road rule is quite time sensitive in terms of getting guidance out there. And I support, giving the status report. And I think it will probably make sense to address some of this in rulemaking, but I guess I'm not 100% sure that that's the case. I mean, it's possible we could do it as guidance. So I guess that's just sort of a caveat. I think we want to be careful with saying we're definitely doing rulemaking when we may not need it. And I agree with you, we need some more legal guidance.
Right. I agree, Kirsten, that, I'm not sure we need what we need. It might be a combination of guidance, rulemaking, and legislative changes. We need to have more legal input before we even know where. Thanks. Brooke.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I feel like I don't know what we need to do, because trying to wrap my brain around all of this and looking at the ideas and the report from 2023, there's been a lot of thought, but I don't feel like I am in the position to start, calling balls and strikes on this. Do we need to engage stakeholders? If so, we need more time than what, even till September. That's just not possible. But my question is, should we provide something like, this is where we're at, like, sort of the work product that we have, to say, this is how it's been altered by 181. This is how we are supporting it being implemented. And going beyond that, we need more time. I don't know if it's of any use to check in to say the changes that were made, we're doing the best we can to implement them. I don't know.
I think we don't need to do that in a report to the legislature. I think we can do that in testimony before the committees. And so I think that would be preferable to me, rather than presenting a work product from us that is, sits in perpetuity, that people might look at that and say, what the heck is that? That doesn't say anything except that we're going to look at something. So I think we can jettison a report at this juncture. It sounds like the five of us are pretty much in agreement on this. Is that right? So I think we just need maybe a motion to have me communicate this to the committee chairs rather than submitting a report on the 17th.
I don't know that we need a motion, do we? And we just decided.
Well,
But
we
do.
we made a motion to ask for an extension on the report, and we got an agreement from the committees of jurisdiction on that extension to September 30th, provided that we provided something to the committees on February 15th, which really means the 17th because of the holiday. So I think it makes sense to just make it a formal decision of the board to go this route. Brooke?
Okay.
I'll move it that we extend our regrets, but request respectfully for an extension of time to, do we have a date certain that we want to request?
I think we won't know until we know what we're going to be pursuing. So we can make a commitment to keep them in the loop.
And then I'll ask for an undefined extension of time to report into them.
Thank you. Sarah?
I will second that, and I think just to add a little bit to the dialogue is there's a two-tiered question that was posed as part of Act 181. And the first part was, should any changes be made? I think the answer is yes. I think the second part is what we need some additional time on. And I think the way that we portray it is because we are interested in actually pursuing some modifications and changes, we need time to make sure that they are reflective of what needs to be addressed and simply not tokenism of something that we do just for the sake of doing, that we do because we have identified that it needs to be done and want to do it well. So with that, that's my second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
I
Hi.
Alex, I didn't hear you, but I saw your hand go up.
Aye, Captain.
Okay, that's 5 ayes. That's unanimous. I will communicate with the committee chairs. Thank you. Next on the agenda is discussion of Tier 3 rulemaking. Alex, do you want to set us up for that?
Yes. So for the last few meetings, we've been discussing elements of the Tier 3 rule, specifically ideas that I've had on revisions to the draft that we promulgated back in October. So what you have in front of you today is a consolidated version of that draft that Rebecca and I worked on. It is still a work in progress. So I want to be clear, Rebecca needs more time with it. And just as importantly, I promised the working group that they would get a chance to look at it and provide some feedback before we formalized it as a board and put it out to the public as our next draft. So it's in the public domain because it's part of our agenda today and the draft is there, but it's not up on the Tier 3 website, and I don't intend to put it up there until Rebecca and I have a little more time with it. The working group has a chance to look at it, and potentially it comes back to you in a slightly revised version if necessary. So with all that table setting, the purpose of today, what I'm asking of you today is now that you can see how it flows in a draft and not just in individual topic questions, do you have any major reservations or questions that you'd like to talk about now?
I don't have any major issues or concerns, Alex. I do have a couple. There was one section I didn't really understand in terms of the mapping methodology that gets discussed here. And maybe I can ask you about that. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
go right ahead. Actually, before you ask it, I should just state for the record, the one missing piece, the really big missing piece that you're not seeing is the revised mapping. And so that's still underway, and apologies that you're not looking at them together. That would have been ideal. But the mapping is being revised, and the most important revision that's happening is really in the habitat connector portion of the tier 3 areas. Not anticipating changes with regard to the headwater stream areas that are currently part of the mapping, not anticipating changes to the significant natural communities that are part of the mapping from the last draft, but anticipating significant winnowing of the habitat connector areas based on the discussions I've been having with Vermont Fish and Wildlife and ways to focus in on the most important of those areas in order to not have as much overreach and reduce the number of those areas on the next version of the map. But yeah, go ahead, Jen. It sounds like you have a question about the mapping.
So, next time you produce a draft, can you have page numbers on it?
Oh, did we forget to do that? We did.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
Yes,
this
absolutely. Sorry about
This is
that.
under mapping A1B before 2 headwater stream areas. So there's a bullet that says identify remaining road segments along the same highest priority connectivity block, retain those proximate to protected lands, identify those within 2,000 feet of each other, retain the longest segment and those proximate to protected lands, eliminate others within 2,000 feet. Can you just describe that a little more clearly?
Yep. I can explain. And hopefully this is helpful for you all right now. I think Rebecca and I are talking about whether this level of technical mapping detail really belongs in the rule. And so it may come out or be referenced and be in some other document. But to answer your specific question, one of the ways that several members of the working group suggested that we narrow the focus for these habitat connector areas is to acknowledge that that protected areas exist, and that to the extent that within a connector area that one is adjacent to an area that is already protected, that area should be the priority for connectivity between these blocks, these highest priority connectivity blocks, such that if you have a blob of habitat connector adjacent to protected lands, and just down the road you have another blob of habitat connector, the way the algorithm worked out, that is not adjacent to protected lands, we should default to the one that's already partially protected, and that would allow us to eliminate the other one if it's within a reasonable distance, the 2,000 feet being the number we're using at the moment.
Okay, and so my question is, what if the protected lands includes a high priority block? Would you need then, can you just focus on that and not adjacent?
That's a good question. We haven't made that leap yet in the mapping. So I mean, it's possible to split a road segment that is what's driving the buffer and creating these habitat connectors, these blobs. So we could split them and just stick to the area, that's immediately adjacent to the protected lands. I'm a little hesitant to do that because connectivity has benefited from how do I say this? Wildlife is not going to pay attention necessarily to just the spot where there's a conservation easement, but they are going to pay attention to the overall road segment that has been identified as having excellent forest cover remaining on both sides of the road. So I kind of see the protected area portion as just a flag to indicate that that overall road segment is a good one that should be
Okay, that's
preserved.
right. And I
Not
think,
that we should narrow it to just that area.
yeah, so the question then is, or not the question. So I guess what I was asking is, if there is a situation where the priority block or the priority connector is protected fully. It's fully within the Green Mountain National Forest or something.
Mhm.
There may be no need to look adjacent to it. That's what I'm saying. There may be cases in which you don't have to look for then further adjacent crossings that to protect because there's plenty already protected. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's the spirit of what we're trying to do with this
Yeah.
revision, is
Okay.
to eliminate road segments and habitat connectors around them that are adjacent to already protected road segments and the habitat
Okay,
connectors
I
around
see,
them.
I see. Okay, now I see. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
so but within a certain distance, right? Because
Yeah,
you have to understand that these highest priority connectivity blocks on either side of the road are very large in most cases, thousands and thousands of acres, which means the road that splits them can extend for thousands and thousands of feet. And
yeah,
these road segments with the habitat connectors around them are going to be very discrete areas. And what Fish and Wildlife and I have talked about is we don't want to assume that one area that is already partially protected that would make for a good habitat connector is sufficient to provide all the connectivity necessary over 10,000 feet of road extending far away from that particular spot. We want some amount of recognition that intervals of that where the forest cover on either side of the road is good is what's appropriate for connectivity. But in close proximity to the areas that you're talking about that are already protected, yeah, we can turn off those other habitat connectors because wildlife should be able to find a way
okay,
within
I
proximity.
see. I see. And I had two more questions on this same section. The first bullet on that same page, select only those highest priority wildlife road crossing segments that have unique highest priority connectivity blocks on both sides within 100 feet. And then it says road segments fully within a singular habitat block are not included. And by singular habitat block, do you mean a block that is not bisected by a road?
Exactly.
Oh, can you say that instead of,
Okay.
yeah, okay, I think it's clearer. Instead of guessing that that's what you meant. Okay. And then in the last bullet, there are some sub bullets. And I didn't quite understand that middle one about impervious surface
Right.
areas.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do with the mapping is to say for habitat connectors is to say here are the road segments that have great forest cover on both sides that bisect highest priority connectivity blocks, and we're going to put a buffer around them of 2,000 feet. But we don't want we recognize that not everything in that buffer should be mapped as tier 3 because there are houses in the buffer. There are cornfields in that 2,000 foot buffer. There are parking lots and such. So we're trying to, what this is trying to say is we're going to try to identify those areas, those developed areas or non-forest, non-natural habitat areas and cut them out of that buffer area so that they will not be tier 3 to begin with. And so that's easy to do around a house, right? We know where the houses are from the emergency 911 data points, and we can put a little buffer around those with the right dimensions and then cut them out of the habitat connector area. But how to do that with other developed features like parking lots that are not houses? I'm thinking that the impervious surface data set is a way to do that. And similarly, other data sets that reflect where agricultural areas are, active agricultural areas. That's a work in progress. The Vermont Conservation by Design connectivity block data itself has already done that.
That's what I was,
Yeah, so in
that's
the
why I'm
first draft of the
confused.
map, we show holes in the habitat
Yeah.
connectors consistent with the Vermont Conservation Design data set. So that's our fallback, is to just go back and continue to use that.
Oh, okay.
But that data was created in 2024, and so any house built since 2024 doesn't have a cutout around it, right?
I
So
see.
it's old data. And for those of you that might remember the conversation, one of the downsides of their update to that data in 2024 is that areas that had recently been harvested for logging appear as holes in their natural cover data set, because the
Yeah.
LiDAR data thought that it no longer was forested. And so that's not accurate. And so I'm trying to recreate that with better data. But if we can't, we're gonna have to default back to what the current draft shows.
Okay, I see. I think that's why I was confused, because I was remembering those holes
Right.
in
We're
the
trying to
earlier
recreate the
data.
holes, but recreate them better and
Up
more
to date.
with the most
Yeah.
up-to-date data.
I see.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Okay, and really, my other marks on the pages here are formatting and grammatical, so I don't need to talk about those.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I should caveat this one more time, to say that you all discussed and decided that we should be revising the general rules and inserting these into the general rules. As you can tell from this document, Rebecca and I haven't done that yet. We have some little descriptors and text boxes that say, where things might go in the general rules.
yeah,
Before we ship this to ICAR, towards the end of the month, if we can do it by then, we're going to need to have it clearer. It's going to have to look more like the actual general rules with language inserted into them. But I'm hopeful that this gives you at least enough to understand, even though formatting and all of that stuff will change.
okay, thank you. Sarah?
So I have one sort of wordsmithing and one that's more substantive. The first is on page 11 under E for exemptions. The last sentence before 1 is these exemptions shall not apply to non-tier 3 jurisdictions. I read through that twice, and if that could be a little bit clearer. I know what you're trying to say, but it's not abundantly clear. So I think when you go through and do some of these cleanups, I think what Janet was identifying, that will hopefully get a little bit clearer. The other thing that I noted on page 11, and you'd asked us for a board, I think it was at the last time that you discussed this, about the extent of tier 3 jurisdiction outside of tier 3 and what attaches. And I think just wanted to call attention to the way that this is worded is that these accessories will attach. So wastewater, stormwater systems that serve things in tier 3 will attach. And I just want to go on record again stating that I don't think that they should. So thank you.
So Sarah, let me clarify. The current draft, sorry, not the current draft, the draft we released in October includes these provisions. And specifically what's being contemplated with regard to like a wastewater system is not that the entire wastewater system would be jurisdictional, but only that the only if it's partially in the tier 3 area would portions outside of the tier 3 area become jurisdictional, and for no greater distance than 100 feet. So want to make sure I'm understanding where your concern lies, because it's very constrained, how much jurisdiction can attach outside of the tier 3 area in this draft. It can really only go as far as a structure that's partially in or out, incorporating all of the structure, or for any other discrete improvement like a wastewater system or a driveway, only as far as 100 feet beyond the boundary of the tier 3 area.
I don't know if that's clear.
Yeah, so
Because,
we're on page 11 of the document, and I
yeah,
apologize for lack
number
of page
2.
numbers, but it's
C2.
it's C2, exactly.
Yeah. I think you stated it more clearly just now than it is written on the page.
Okay,
Or-
I can make a note to try to make it clearer, but I think Sarah's point is more substantive than just wording, right? Sarah, you're
Yeah.
saying you'd prefer it not to extend outside of the tier 3 area in
At all.
any case, even for an improvement that's partially in and out.
Correct.
How about a
Oh.
structure? Are you
Oh,
okay
you know
with a
what?
structure covering that, or?
I take it back. I think it is clear. Sorry. Reading it again. But and I understand now that Sarah's is more a substantive disagreement with the idea of extending. So outside. Brooke?
Just had a quick question about the bifurcation of structures versus all other improvements. Do we have like a clear understanding of what a structure is for this
Mhm.
purpose?
I do. Do you not? What's not clear about that in your mind?
Well, is a fence a structure? Is a wall a structure? I mean, it's not like there's an exhaustive list here, so I was just curious.
Yeah, in my mind, structure has more than one dimension. It's a 2-dimensional. Well, I guess it's a 3-dimensional object. So yeah, I've never thought of walls, fences, and those sorts of linear features as structures. But I suppose you make a valid point. Such things could have depth and therefore be questioned as to whether they're a structure. I guess it is, in my mind, it's sort of the conventional understanding of a structure. A structure is something with 4 walls, or at least 4 supports and a roof. So things like sheds, houses, gazebos,
Okay.
all of those sorts of things. But you think it would benefit, Brooke, if we had if we cited to a definition of structure, just to clear up any ambiguity?
Like a tent platform, or yeah, there might be some unusual ones,
bridge.
a bridge. Because I've seen like zoning ordinances, have a definition that's, different from one place to another.
Okay. Well, I can certainly work with Rebecca to find a place to cite to for our use of the term structures, or this section could be simplified, and it could be for any development, it will be like number 2 and not like number 1. But my thought was, it's just awkward with traditional structures like houses or garages to have potentially just a portion of that building be jurisdictional and not the entire building. But we don't necessarily have to worry about that, especially if you're more in line with Sarah's thinking that the tier 3 boundary should be hard and fast, and that anything that's partially in or out, it doesn't matter. The jurisdiction ends at the boundary, period.
You're muted, Janet.
Sorry. As I recall, in one of the first stakeholder meetings, there was discussion about, these kinds of situations where the extension of that structure or development could affect the tier 3 area. And was this how the stakeholders in you came to sort of take that into account?
Yeah, and I think that there was a question in those meetings, a very practical question, which is if you only have jurisdiction over a portion of the structure, what happens to the other portion of it, both during the review and going forward? And it just seemed like it was more straightforward to capture the entire structure rather than just a portion of it if it happens to be split. Do I think that that's going to happen very often? I don't, but it could, and that's why this was inserted.
Can I ask Sarah to make an argument for not having this 100-foot, potentially 100-foot extension?
So I think what I articulated in consideration of this, with the more substantial than 100 feet, was the concern about perverse results. If you're trying to discourage development in the tier 3 area, and if you have a shared community wastewater system, for instance, if the shared community wastewater system is going to trigger Act 250, because one of the homes is in the tier 3 area, it sort of lowers that barrier to, well, if the wastewater system that other homes are going to depend upon is jurisdictional too, why not just locate more homes in tier 3 if it's going to be triggered anyway? And so it's a little bit of creep. I hear Alex's struggle in terms of having a hard and fast boundary can sometimes be more difficult. But I just like it as being a clearer, more predictable and confined, that really keeps with the intent of discouraging additional development within tier 3.
So, Sarah, I wonder, this 100-foot rule would suggest to me, I mean, you can't have a shared wastewater system that close to a house, for instance. Is that right? Those who might understand the rules around wastewater systems. So I don't think that as written, this would ever implicate an entire wastewater system. It might implicate a pipe for 100 feet. Is that a correct interpretation of this, Alex?
Well, not entirely. So imagine a situation in which a house is being built as a part of a subdivision, and that one house of the 5 is in the tier 3 area, so it triggers jurisdiction. And in addition to the house, the wastewater system for the shared 5 houses, the leach field, is half in and half out of the tier 3 area. So the portion that's half in is jurisdictional along with that one house of the 5. And then the question becomes, what do you do with the other half of the wastewater system? Is that, are we going to grab that? Are we going to move out 100 feet and grab that? Or are we going to just cut the wastewater system in half? So it's possible. It just depends on, the relation of things. What you're saying is true. Typically, you're not going to have a wastewater leach field that close to a house, but it's not just the house that is the trigger for tier 3 areas, right? It's the improvement of that area. And so that could be the house and part of the driveway, yard space, portion of leach field, could be all of the leach field, depends where the tier 3 mapping is.
Stormwater swale, for instance.
But I'm not sure, Sarah, that gets you anything, because if a portion of the stormwater swale is in the tier 3 area and therefore is jurisdictional, then the district commission has to wrestle with the impacts of that portion of the stormwater swale. Regardless of who's benefiting from it, that house, the other 4 in the subdivision. All this is saying is that we have a boundary, and for convenience, for everyone's convenience, it's easier to have discrete improvements track one way or the other, either be in or out of the tier 3 jurisdiction. And so if you're partially in, we're going to try to use all of that discrete improvement, but we are going to put a linear distance limit on that of 100 feet so that we don't have creep.
Thank you. That clarifies further. Brooke?
So where are we legally in terms of being able to assert jurisdiction outside the lines of a tier 3 mapped area? I'm curious about that, and because do we have to look at, okay, there's a wastewater system, and so it's automatically the whole system, or maybe it is just a pipe. And so if we're worried about tier 3 and protecting tier 3 areas because they're sensitive, why would we not be confining it just to the boundary of the tier 3? And
Good question,
if there's
Brooke.
a whole system, who cares? We're worried about the impact on the critical resource in a certain spot.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
a
rest
good,
of the
that's a good point.
house, the garage, whatever, why does that matter?
Right, and extending it up to 100 feet, why is that any different than drawing the boundary 100 feet in, really, in the end?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to approach your question, Brooke. One is, do we have the authority to capture development outside of a tier 3 area as a part of the tier 3 rules? And I'll leave that to our legal team. Rebecca and I can look into that because it's a good point. When you look at the statutory construction, the trigger per statute is commercial, industrial, or residential development in a tier 3 area. So someone might argue, well, you can't go beyond the boundary. So we'll look into the legal implications of that. I think the way around that is to, if we feel like some buffer to the tier 3 areas is relevant for the district commissions to consider, would be to define the tier 3 areas with that buffer included, which we are doing with the significant natural communities. If you look at the definitions there, we talk about a 50-foot buffer around those as also being tier 3. And so we could do that as well. But this provision with the 100 feet and, discrete improvements, trying to capture all of them, had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with sort of practical considerations in a review process and the ability for a landowner to understand what portions of their project or what portions of the property they are buying is in fact jurisdictional under a permit granted, because of tier 3 jurisdiction. So I'm not wedded to it. If all of you feel like it's too fraught, I'm happy to maybe talk to our coordinators and say, what do you think? You're the ones that have to help the district commissions interpret this. Is this helpful, or is this just, is this just dancing around where we don't need to?
And on that, natural community issue, I think there is a scientifically based basis for having a buffer from whatever the delineation of the edge of the fen is, or whatever it might be. The others, I'm not seeing it. Where I think if you were just to build in, let's throw in 100 feet or something, I don't see a basis for that generally.
I think there is a basis, but I'm not sure I really want to argue it. I think that you could make a scientific basis for a buffer for the habitat connector areas, right? This does happen in development review quite a lot, where a particular habitat has been identified, and development, if it were allowed to occur right up to the edge of it, would have indirect impacts on that habitat, whether it's deer wintering area or some other form of habitat. So I think you could make the case that a buffer for the purposes of the habitat connectors might also be a sensible thing. The headwater stream areas, I could probably make that argument too, but again, this provision wasn't put in here to address these kinds of issues of indirect impacts. This provision was put in for practical sort of how do we make this system work and not make everybody understand? So that's sort of the context
Because
I
how
prefer
do
to
you-
talk about it in.
How do you review the corner of a house? Right? Is that what you mean? Like,
That's part
how,
of it, absolutely.
how do you review the impacts of, you know, a partial improvement, basically?
Right.
You
Let's
have
say
to
a
understand what the
stormwater.
full, you have to understand what the full improvement is. If you have a gable roof and all the water is falling off that side into your tier 3 area, even though the peak of the roof is outside of the tier 3 area, you're affecting the tier 3 area with that structure, even though it's not fully within the area. For instance.
It does harken back to our conversation, I think, at our last meeting, where one of our coordinators had suggested that we might want to attach jurisdiction much further away from the tier 3 areas for a project that needed to have some mitigation in order to address impacts within the tier 3 area. So screening, for example, or primag soil mitigation on site, but in a different location. And we were all pretty cool to that idea, right? We thought that's creep. Like, I don't think we want to write that into the rule that that we're going to expressly attach jurisdiction to those sorts of areas. And so this is a similar conversation. Honestly, the more I think about it, it's going to be really hard for our commissions not to think about those things, though, right? Like, how is the tier 3 area being impacted with regard to criterion 1? And are there water issues that are happening elsewhere that do in fact impact what's happening in the tier 3 area? So yeah, I'm not sure why I put that out there. It complicates things, but I've been thinking about it. Kirsten, do you have something to help us on this front?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just offer my perspective that if the applicant is identifying some of its land that is located beyond the tier 3 area in order to satisfy the criteria, and therefore it needs to be, have some status. I don't know how else you would do it, but to include, identify it in the permit as part of the, some other non-contiguous land or what have you, that's subject to Act 50 jurisdiction and the permit conditions in those instances. I don't think that's going to be typical, but I think that could occur. And unless it's under Act 50 jurisdiction as part of the project that triggered review due to the fact that it's in tier 3, I mean, I think that's just, I suppose maybe they could offer up some other mechanism.
No, I'm totally with you on that, Kirsten. I'm just not sure whether we should formally address it in this rule or if we should just let it be unstated and understood that that's just the reality of things.
Well, and it's also, if you were to go with that idea and that route, why would you need this? Why would you need to extend tier 3? So
right, that's a very good point. Very good point. So maybe if we can get our heads around what Kirsten just said, this portion that we're talking about could go away.
It's similar to the question that we wrestled with around logging and forestry when there was on a larger portion on a larger parcel that is subject to mostly it's just a timber lot, right? And there was a commercial operation that used a very small portion of the property, and there was a permit condition that required that a no-cut zone, right? It's the same question, isn't it? And
well, Could be. I mean, there could be some habitat mitigation or 9D
Right.
mitigation or some other
Right.
offset to the development impact. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm pondering it is that it might be nice in maybe this section gets substantially revised and winnowed down to say that to just acknowledge that commissions have the ability to impose conditions related to mitigation that an applicant proposes outside of the tier 3 area in order to satisfy the review criteria for the development in the tier 3 area. I'm just reiterating what Kirsten
Yeah.
said. Sorry, Kirsten. It helps me to speak it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will say for my part, I'm having a little bit of a hard time wrapping my head around how one reviews, you know, like half a building or it, but I mean, if the emphasis is on it's the impacts to the tier 3 resource, then it's the impact of that portion of the building on the resource.
Right. They just don't get to look beyond that, beyond the tier 3 areas. What we're talking about right now, per Brooks' point, that, you know, if there's 25% of the building in the tier 3 area, they don't get to look at the 75% that is outside of the tier 3 area. They have to just say, we're focused on this, and whatever's happening out there has no relationship to the development impacts that we are holding this project to with regard to the 10 criteria.
Well, I mean, it does have impacts, like the roof example. You know, there is runoff from a roof that could have negative impacts on that tier 3 resource, let's just say. And even if the runoff is coming from outside of the tier 3 area. So it doesn't mean that tier 3 extends to the full extent of the building, but you have to consider the whole structure in terms of what its impacts are, what the impacts of the development are.
But only to the extent that the impact is happening in the tier 3 area, right?
Right.
So if that
Exactly.
roof is draining and it's draining into the tier 3 area, it's not the additional roof outside of the tier 3 area that you need to worry about. It's what's happening, the end result of that, what's happening in the tier 3 area that you have to factor in, right? If it were draining in the other direction and splashing outside of the tier 3 area, it would be irrelevant entirely. So, you know, maybe it's that simple. It's you're addressing impacts within the tier 3 area per Brooks' point.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Brooke.
Yeah, but how that will actually be analyzed by a district coordinator, I think there's a big difference because I'm hearing Kirsten, and I think it will be a struggle to focus on that impact. It's a challenge.
Well-
I'm not sure how it would be, but I would love for Kirsten to give some thought to that and give us some.
I think we all need
advice
to give some
about-
more thought to this. I also find myself wondering about this sort of like other administrative element of this where, you know, fees are assessed based on the estimated cost of construction. And, you know, do you only, like, if it's a third of the building that's in, do you just pay a third of that construction basis fee for the whole thing? I mean, that's also
Yeah.
a detail.
Actually, yeah, Alex, that's another piece of your rules you need to address probably.
Oh my goodness,
Or
we're not
maybe
going
it's
to do that in
guidance.
rules. We'll do that some other way,
Yeah, okay,
guidance or
but-
what have you. But yeah,
but
the
yeah.
example that Billy Coster raised in our working group was, okay, so there's a building and it's partially in the tier 3 area and it gets approved. And then that landowner comes back in 2 years and wants to put an addition on the building. What is that going to be a material change? And does it depend on where on the building the addition goes, you know, within the tier 3 area or on the portion of the building that's on the other side of the bright line? And yeah, we just need to be
Well-
clear about it. That's all.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the jurisdiction ends up being confined to just the portion of the project where located in the tier 3 area, then subsequent changes to the project located beyond that tier 3 area wouldn't be subject to the material change question, and they wouldn't return to, it's not in Act 250, so it wouldn't return to Act 250 for an amendment.
Right. So there's some benefit to, having a bright line with the tier 3 delineation and being able to say that's where it is. You're outside of that in the future. It's not a material change. But again, from a practical standpoint, it seems awkward to me, right? It seems awkward we would split the building and only take jurisdiction over my bedroom, but not my son's bedroom, on the other side of the building.
It's definitely a very strong incentive to stay out of the tier 3 areas with the construction activity, if feasible, for a lot of people would be, I think.
Yeah, well, that's Sarah's point. That's good. That's true.
So can I ask another question? It's like a question about something else altogether in the draft rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Alex, the draft rule with respect to map revisions, like the sort of map updates, not the map errors, but I think it's called, I don't have it up in front of me, map revisions, indicates that like a map update would require a rule revision. And I was surprised by that. I wasn't envisioning that in order to change the map, you'd have to go back all the way back through rulemaking. I mean, I was envisioning that the rule would prescribe the mapping methodology, and that if, conditions changed such that the map would logically change as prescribed by the rule, then that could occur outside of a supplemental rulemaking process. So could we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So that's a big ticket item. So it's great that you brought it up, and we need to all be clear on it. There very much was a feeling that we are breaking new ground in Vermont by mapping these sensitive areas and establishing Act 250 jurisdiction over them, or at least over certain development within them, and that doing that is sensitive, but not just for the resource, but for the people who own those properties. And because of that, I think the working group was, most of them at least, if not all of them, really felt like it should be a public process. People should know when this map gets updated, and potentially additional areas are added to it, or possibly, areas are subtracted. And that the only way to make sure that that happens, and that the legislature is aware of it happening as well, is to have it go through the rulemaking process. So I know you're not talking about the error remedy, but the thought was like, we got to have a way to make corrections to pure errors, like in the moment, on the spot, for a particular project. But in terms of like, let's add a new data layer, a new mapping layer to tier 3, like that's a big policy question. And the feeling was it's better to do that through rulemaking.
Well, yeah, no, I wasn't envisioning that a mapping revision would be of the type that you just mentioned, of, oh, now we're going to add this layer. I was envisioning like on the ground conditions change, and it's not an error, it's something else. And so the rule prescribes the mapping methodology and the specific resources, but the map itself needs to live in the real world and perhaps be, have some ongoing kind of adaptability and update. So I understand what you're saying, and thank you for the context. And I would wholeheartedly agree. Of course, there needs to be a very robust public process around putting these things on a map, but are we confident that a rulemaking process is the sort of a good way to ensure that?
It's a good question. The only other thing I would say, though, before I'll let others speak to that, is I think there's sensitivity to landowners' ability to understand when their property is being affected by a regulation.
Right.
And so there was some talk in the beginning of this at the working group level to say, well, how about those significant natural communities, for example? More of those get delineated every year. Some of those new ones that get delineated will be in the rare or very rare category and will be upland and therefore will meet our definition for tier 3 purposes. But in order to make sure everyone is sort of on notice and understands the import of being added to the tier 3 mapping, we structured it this way rather than saying based on the most up-to-date mapping by Vermont Fish and Wildlife, to be referenced or updated on an annual basis. Like we opted to have it be a more formal process. Whether rulemaking is the right formal process to ensure public notice and these policy decisions, that's I'm open to hearing more about that. But that's why it's drafted the way it is.
I just don't know, but it's certainly a very legitimate, robust process.
Do others have thoughts on
You're on-
Kirsten's
you're on
Oh,
mute,
question?
Janet.
Sorry, that's what I was just asking, but my mic was muted. So board members, Brooke, Sarah? Thoughts? I'll say that unless somebody puts forth another process that would provide that kind of predictable public engagement, I support it as written. I don't think we can just, provide updates annually, even as data changes or as the situation on the ground changes, because this issue of landowner notice is critical.
I agree.
Brooke?
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like rulemaking is the place for the really important stuff that the public needs to be able to have a venue to come and be heard on. It's really critically important. So, but having said that, I think we have to be very careful about what we're choosing to put in a rule in terms of information that may change over time. And what I'm talking about is like substance over form, like there may be like the name of a database or, just like things that we want to write it into a rule in a way that gives flexibility only insofar as when you name something and then it might be a different version later on, those kinds of things. But what is the most important thing for this rule is to make sure everyone knows the rules. What are the substantive rules of how this is going to be done or will be done whenever it's done? And so one of my thoughts was, and it's just some general thoughts, I can give Alex some more specifics on a few little tweaks here and there on the rules, but I was a little bit confused maybe isn't the right word, but trying to find the guiding principles to what it is that we want to put in this rule. What is the most important thing for people to know who are impacted and affected, all of the citizens of Vermont? And I want to make sure that we're not unnecessarily expanding it into areas that then we don't have the flexibility to alter or change. But when it comes, the rubber hits the road, we need to be able to ensure that decisions that we are trying to create and implement here that we're charged with doing are not just as we, a board, decide on, that we are reflecting the needs and the desires and the concerns of Vermonters. So I think making is essential for the important stuff in this. I don't see what's more important than how your land is going to be regulated by the state.
Brooke, are you perhaps suggesting that the purpose statement could be a little bit more embellished? Partially,
Yeah,
you know,
I got-
like saying that not just, I mean, the way that it states now, the purpose of these rules is to identify the tier 3 critical natural resources that require protection through the Act 250 permitting process, but maybe harken back to the statutory language that says what the purpose of tier 3 is.
Yeah, that's so important because we cannot lose sight of the purpose when we're trying to implement a statute. We got to be tied to the important fundamental reason why this has been put into law. So I totally agree with you. And I don't have any language to suggest right now, but we can certainly put our heads on it.
We probably just look at the language in statute and paraphrase it, or maybe not paraphrase it, but quote it. Sarah?
So you'd asked what Brooke and I thought, and I had the fortune of going after Brooke, so I don't need to say much other than I agree.
Okay. All right. Kirsten?
Thanks, everyone. Good discussion. I have another question that I'd like to ask Alex, if that's okay.
Yep.
So Alex, you've prescribed this very specific mapping refinement methodology as a component of the rule. And I guess I just wanted to get a sense from you, having spent, I think, quite a bit of time studying the maps already and how that would be applied to refine them. Are there other, are there areas where maybe this won't work? You know, like, is this, these maps, as I see them, they, you know, they take all these different shapes and forms and characteristics in it. And so are you pretty comfortable that this methodology can be applied in this standardized way and achieve the intended results? Like, and I've thought about the numbers and what you're saying, but it's quite detailed what is outlined.
Yes, so the short answer is the proof will be in the pudding, and you haven't seen the pudding yet. So let me finish the next round of mapping, and then we can talk about whether it's achieving the ultimate aims, and whether it's also addressing the concerns that have been raised about the first draft, in terms of overreach and the like. I am very optimistic. And our partner in Vermont Fish and Wildlife is similarly optimistic, but we haven't finished the mapping yet. So both of us sort of need to see the final result to have a better sense of that. What I'll say, so sorry, that's sort of an obfuscating answer because you need to see the maps. But what I would say beyond that is the reason for all the detail that you see in this draft of the mapping protocol is because I'm going to blame Rebecca, because Rebecca was pretty clear that it should be transparent to a member of the public or legislator or whoever what data sets we use to come up with this tier 3 mapping and what our protocol was, so that it could be reproduced, potentially, or it could be disputed. And so because we have a provision in this rule that says if there's a mapping error, that there is a remedy for landowners to have that error addressed. Errors can crop up in many different ways, right? It's not just the data sets we use to inform the mapping. It's also the protocol we use to shape and refine those data sets. And so I'm blaming Rebecca, but I agree with her that we need like everybody needs that level of clarity to understand how we did it, why it looks the way it does, and potentially where we screwed up along the way. So yeah,
Well, yeah, I
those are
would
my two answers.
wholeheartedly agree. It needs to be a clear, consistent methodology. And so thank you for sharing what you can, and I look forward to seeing some maps. Maybe you could bring back an example, like
Oh,
if
yeah,
when
for
you're
sure.
when you're ready. Like, I mean, I'm sure we'll see them eventually, but before maybe you do it like statewide, right? Like kind of show us how it's starting to look.
Yeah,
Would be
I'm happy
great
to
from my
walk you through an
perspective.
example of like, here's an area with a bunch of habitat connectors that were identified through step 10. And then here's how they were refined through step 15 to highlight just the most sensitive or important ones. I'm happy to walk you through an example. And I
That'd be
want to be
great.
perfectly upfront. I've been looking at the data a lot for a long time. And there are anomalies. There are places where, you know, a habitat connector is mapped and I look at it and our partner at Vermont Fish and Wildlife looks at it and we say, yeah, I understand how the algorithm resulted in that being identified, but that doesn't belong there. Like we should remove that as a habitat connector. So there are going to be examples like that. And yeah, I'll walk you through some examples and yeah.
And so the question is, when you come to one of those areas, Alex, and you see, yeah, I see how the algorithm got us here, but that shouldn't be there. What are the criteria by which that last step is, that shouldn't be there? And is that in this mapping section?
It's not. I'm fessing up right now, thanks to
Okay.
Kirsten prodding me that's not in the mapping protocol, and I think it's going to need to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I'm just seeing it as I walk through the data. Yeah, I won't bore you with my circular work on this over the last week or so, but you get to one point and you think it's done, and then you realize that the GIS didn't work quite the way you thought it would, and so you have to start over, and it's iterative.
It's never done. Alex, or no, I'm sorry, not Alex, Brooke.
Just one thing that popped out earlier that I hadn't mentioned, and that is standard of review on page 10 is clear and convincing evidence. Seems a little bit high. I mean, the burden of proof should be on person claiming the error or that, the physical community doesn't exist or whatever the critical resource is, but clear and convincing preponderance, I think, is more than adequate.
Hey, that's a specific suggestion, preponderance versus clear and convincing. Thank you for being specific, Brooke. I'll take that back to Rebecca. If you didn't guess, this was not language that started with my brain. This was Rebecca's good thinking.
Okay, Brooke, do you have something else?
Sorry, no.
Okay. Alex, is there anything about this draft that we haven't touched upon that you want us to touch upon before we stop discussing this today?
Nope, we did enough the last few meetings that I was kind of wondering what we would even talk about today, and all of you came up with good items, so thanks for that.
Okay, are there any other good items from board members before we, at an early point, move on to the next agenda item? Are there any comments from any public on this item or any other not on the agenda to be made at this point? Okay, then I think we can move on to discussion of road construction jurisdiction guidelines. And Sarah, do you want to lead us off?
So this is just a very preliminary conversation to sort of update the board at where we're at. Brooke and I have endeavored to take this up and move efficiently through it. I think we both have had some time to reflect. I think there's going to be some additional follow-up this week. We do not have anything drafted to share yet. My hope is that next week we will, realizing that we are not meeting next week. So hopefully the next regular meeting, we will have a draft to share. But I think that Brooke particularly wanted to give more due consideration to the proposed definitions that were floated to the board a couple meetings ago. And so hopefully we can let her have that bandwidth to do that and then work to create a draft. I will give credit to Aaron Brondike, began some drafting. We followed up with him last week and talked a lot to the different topics that he covered. And just very much appreciate him putting pen to paper on it. So I don't have anything more to share unless Brooke, you want to chime in, but I think just we want to give a status update that this is of high importance and we're working on it in the background, but want to make sure that we are redundant with the board, we're respectful of time, and that we get you something more solid and concrete to go over at the next regular meeting.
Brooke, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I've spent some time looking back at some MAC 250 cases from long ago when we had the first road rule, which was different, and so that's important to keep in mind. But because in trying to conceptualize how, what kind of bright lines and how can we define driveway or road, I came across an interesting case that I think, and it talked about, whether or not something was a driveway or whether it was a road. And it focused on something that I was like, oh, but it's so much easier just to say a driveway is something that serves just one abode or one lot or whatever. And then you get to, oh, if it's two lots, then automatically you're at a road, not a driveway, or, those kinds of notions. And there was a really interesting Supreme Court case that reviewed a situation like that. And because it was sort of like automatically it was a road because it was serving two lots. And it talked about how that would be very counterproductive. In fact, it would have encouraged the building of two roads or driveways or what have you, instead of having that shared one, way in and then to split to the individual houses. And it's a really important point because every time you are trying to conceptualize and think about how could this work the easiest and how could it be implemented, and the old road rule, they looked at what you had done to the road and what kind of base there was, and all that kind of stuff, which is what we are trying to we're trying to find something easier and easier to implement. So it is taking a little bit of time, but I think it's super important. This is such an important activity of ours, a task that we've been given that we need to be very cautious and careful about, that we don't exceed the statutory grant of jurisdiction, and that we do it in a way that will be that will work for Vermonters. It will be predictable. So I apologize for not having answers or questions or conversations specifically designed for today about this. I'm trying to bring you a little bit of a baked cake so that we're considering all of the options, but understand what some of the pitfalls might be to really narrow in on what might be the best options for definitions.
Thank you. Sorry, Alex?
Oh, I want to say thanks to both you, Brooke and Sarah, for working on this. And I'm happy. I look forward to what we see the next time, and a partially or more fully baked cake. I think we're ready for that. So I appreciate you working on it. With that in mind, And I really appreciate the updates that you've helped make sure happen to our web page on this, because I'm directing people there for information on it, and I hadn't gone back to see just what you added to it, and I just did and realized, hey, it's fully up to date and it's got good information that's different from what it was, a month ago. So anyways, thank you for that. And I will note, like, we weren't given a charge on this, right? The statute didn't tell us to create guidance or to write rules. It gave us the ability to write rules, but we could have just done nothing and allowed the lawyers to figure this out for everybody. And so the fact that we're putting together guidance, I think, is good. And it's not due to a statutory charge. It's because we want to help people.
I know there are people waiting on the edge of their seats for some specific guidance. And so we are really putting our heads on this and trying to make sure that we help in that regard.
Right. I think I'll just say that pros and cons is the statute doesn't give us a lot of ability to change or flexibility. But I do think that there are certain situations, such as people with partially constructed roads going into the construction season with July 1st, in the middle of construction season being the deadline, that want some assurances. So we are absolutely striving to provide whatever assurances that we can for some clear-cut guidance, so that people can enter into their construction season knowing and have a predictable outcome.
Okay. Anything further on road construction jurisdiction guidance today? Great, we are an hour ahead of time. And time to move on to discussions of appeals enforcement and attorney-client communications, privileged attorney-client communications. Brooke, do you have a motion?
I do. The board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and other attorney-client privileged communications. I move that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage, and the board enter executive session, including the additional enforcement matter docket 2024_039, in addition to those listed on our agenda.
Thank you. And I'll just point out that we are not discussing personnel matters, although that is on the agenda.
Second.
Do we have thank you, Alex. Any discussion on that before we vote? Okay, seeing and hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
That was 5 ayes. That is unanimous. So we will exit the public portion of the meeting for a time, have our executive session conversation, and then report back to this meeting before adjourning. Thank you for being with us. Okay, let's wait for Sarah to get back to the room there. There she is. Okay, we are all back in the open session. We have a series of motions, and then we do want to report out on another discussion that we had with within the executive session. So let's hear the motions first. Kirsten?
I move to authorize enforcement to add Act 250 information to the Agency of Natural Resources NOAV regarding enforcement case 2024-039, which is a mixed Agency of Natural Resources and Land Use Review Board case, Act 250 case.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Brooke. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, hearing and seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is 5 ayes. That is unanimously passed. Alex, Brooke, you had one.
I move that the board authorize legal to enter a notice of appearance in environmental court matter 26-ENV-00010.
Thank you. Kirsten, are you seconding?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
I think that was 5, yes. That's unanimous. And we have one more motion.
Yep, that would be me. So I'll make a motion to authorize enforcement to transmit proposed assurance of discontinuance to the respondents in enforcement matter 2022_72 with a directive to rectify the deficiencies in the incomplete land use permit application number 1R0095-1. to pay a $3,000 civil penalty and to reimburse $963.80 worth of enforcement costs.
Thank you, Alex.
Second.
Thank you, Brooke. Any further discussion on that one? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is 5. That is also unanimous. Thank you. And so lastly, the board began a discussion about there seems to be a movement, at least from the Senate side, to open up Act 181 a little bit and look at perhaps some effective dates and deadlines. And the board wanted to hear from our legal team as to whether there were any concerns if we were to weigh in or entertain these ideas about extending deadlines, Act 181 deadlines or effective dates. So the board would like to put this on the agenda for our next regular meeting and have discussion in open session, whereby we will, as a board, hopefully coalesce or come to some sorts of decisions on where we think effective dates and deadlines should be. We also want to reiterate that we did provide to the legislature before they convened that we do recommend, and this is just a reminder, that that existing Act 250 permits in Tier 1A areas, we believe should stay, the enforcement authority should stay with the Land Use Review Board until such time as a project under an Act 250 permit transfers to a municipal permit. So as a reminder, we want to include that in any feedback that we give the legislative committees that are considering changes regarding Act 181. So any any comments on that, we do want to warn that on an agenda and have further discussion on that soon. With that, we have only one thing left to do here today.
I'll move to adjourn.
Oh, thank you, Brooke.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kirsten. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is a unanimous vote. We will adjourn and see you next time. Thank you, everybody.